Good morning, everybody. It is about 7:30 a.m. and let's dye a corset in my yard. If I was doing this video pre-coronavirus, I would have done a super nice setup inside. I would have had a respirator. I would have had a hot plate. It would have been all staged and beautiful. But that was the before times, and this is now. So as part of the shed series, I'm going to show you how to dye a corset in a really kind of a low budge, low tech sort of way. Now there's a couple things about dyeing first before we get started. Dye is actually more toxic than you might think. So when I was in college, we were really careful to always mix powdered dye in one of those boxes with the gloves, like you stick your hands in and then you like close the top and mix the thing. I forget what those are even called. Dye is toxic. You don't want to inhale it. You don't want to get it on your skin. Just because you can buy it at the grocery store or Walmart doesn't necessarily mean it's safe. That's why I'm doing this outside. If you can do it outside, that's great. If not, I really recommend good ventilation and, if possible, a respirator with approved cartridges. Finding that kind of thing right now is not the easiest. Please don't take any of my safety suggestions as official expert advice in any way. I am very much a DIYer on all of this as well. Err on the side of precautions. Today we are going to dye one of our Victorian corsets. These are sateen fashion fabric and coutil strength layer. That is all 100% cotton, so is the binding. The thread that we use to stitch our corsets is polyester, so that will take dye slightly differently, as will the drawstring and the lacing, which I have already removed because it will dye better if it's out of the corset. The first thing you want to do is make sure that your corset is wet, so I've pre-soaked it. You don't want any dry spots because those spots are going to take the dye differently and you're going to end up with a splotchy result. If you're trying to match an exact color, what I would suggest doing is getting a piece of cotton fabric that's also white and doing some samples first. I'm just gonna kind of wing this and see what color we get, and whatever color we get is lovely and beautiful. I recommend going a little more on the artsy side of things rather than the exact color match. Dyeing is a science, but it's very much an art too. So here is what we're gonna use today. This is a Tulip brand dye that you can get at the grocery store or Walmart in the US. Some grocery stores, not all. Or, you know, like Joanne Fabrics, that kind of thing. It's very similar to RIT. This tutorial applies to basically all of your easily locally purchased dyes. So it says, wear protective gloves, avoid eye and skin contact. The first step is fill a bowl or stainless steel sink with 1 gallon of steaming hot water, then stir in a 1/4 cup of salt, then pour in dye packet and stir until dissolved. Then submerge fabric in dye mixture. Stir continually for 15 minutes and then occasionally for 45 minutes. I'm probably not going to leave it in that long because I'm going to go for more of a pink, I think. But I'm just going to kind of keep an eye on it and see what I think. Then you have to rinse in cold water. Machine wash warm and dry per laundry instructions. Well, we won't be machine washing this corset, but we will be rinsing it out with the garden hose. So here's my setup. I've got water heating up on the grill because I'm going to pour the dye packet right into that pot. Now I would be dyeing the corset right in that pot, but it's actually a little too long. Like I need a bigger pot. So then I was like, oh, I mean I could try doing it in a plastic bin, but I'm worried about it getting too hot and accidentally melting it on camera and then you will all laugh at me. Then I was like, wait, I have a huge metal bin. It's my wheelbarrow. My wheelbarrow is now the cleanest it has ever been. I've scrubbed the thing out. It doesn't leak much. So we're gonna actually dye the corset. We're gonna start our dye bath on the grill, and then we're gonna dye the corset in the wheelbarrow, and then we're gonna rinse it with the garden hose. I am hoping that that pot will have enough water in it to submerge the corset in the wheelbarrow, but we'll just have to see. One thing you could do if you were trying to work inside with powdered dye, mix it into a small amount of water outside and then bring it inside. That will reduce the airborne quality of it. It's going to turn it into a liquid instead of a powder that's getting up into the air and into your respiratory system. So yeah, if I was trying to match an exact color, this is when I would start mixing dye in the pot and testing swatches and hoping and praying that the corset itself would dye the same as the swatches. We're gonna just be artsy this morning. I'm also wearing paint clothes so that if I get this all over myself, which I'm likely to do, it's not too bad of a thing. There's a robin. We got all the wildlife out here this morning. You can get really specific with ratios of dye to water to amount of fabric and all of that, but that's not my style. Sure. I'm gonna mix that up and let it kind of cook for a bit. Okay, so we've let our dye bath cook for a little bit. It's nice and steamy, it's nice and stirred. I'm gonna go ahead and pour it into the wheelbarrow and hopefully not pour it all over myself or the ground. All right, so now we're at the stage of adding the corset itself. So I've already pre-wetted the whole thing. I'm gonna go ahead and just throw the laces in there as well. And we will see what happens. So I've never used this exact dye before, this exact color. I have no idea how this is actually going to turn out. I think it's gonna end up a lot more pink than I was expecting, which is fun. So hey, that's cool. One thing you wanna make sure is that you have enough room in your dye bath for the corset to move around, because you're gonna wanna kind of shove it around and turn it and make sure that it's not getting any folds or spots where the dye isn't touching it. If you think about like tie-dye, you're trying to avoid that. Oh, wow. Oh, that's gonna be pretty. So if you're trying to dye your corset a super deep saturate color, like dark blue or black, you will probably have trouble. Dyeing black is notoriously difficult, even in the best scenarios. I would recommend staying with a lighter color if possible. If you want a super dark color, it's honestly better to just make the corset that color right off the bat rather than try to dye it dark. But for pastels to medium tones like this works great. And you can tell that our waist tapes are polyester. And our label, look at that, that's kind of fun. But the corset itself, okay, so theoretically this dye color is red, but I will say even the dye bath looked pretty darn pink, not red. So I would take that with a grain of salt. Dye colors are often not quite what you think they're gonna come out to be. Like for instance, cocoa brown always comes out really more of a rusty red than a brown. That's a RIT dye, cocoa brown. Wow, this is bright though. Okay, so I'm just gonna let this cook in my wheelbarrow for a bit and keep giving it occasional stirs, and we'll come back in a little while and see what we think. Definitely more pink than red, but I don't hate it. Wow, that is a vibrant hot pink. We'll see how much washes out though in the final rinse stage. So it's interesting, you can see that the corset is picking up a lot of the sort of pinker tones from the dye because the dye bath itself looks a lot more red than the corset is turning. All right, so it's been cooking for a little while and this is definitely not red, but it is definitely a pretty color. So I'm gonna call that a win. So let's say we really were trying to go for red and we got this color and we were disappointed. One way to kind of kick the pink towards red is to do an over dye with green. It's a complementary color thing, and so it will actually knock out some of the bright pink and take it more towards a brownish red. I also feel like this is just a very pinkish red dye in general, so I don't know that I would use this tulip dye in the color red to dye something red. I think I would actually go back to Ritz Scarlet because I've used that dye before and I definitely know that that one comes out more red in general. And it's time to rinse. Oh wow, the drawstring really did take the dye well too. That's cool. I'm gonna just hose it down on my patio chair here. Super profesh. Okay, so we thought that the laces were taking dye. They actually were not. They were just holding the water. So almost all of the dye is washing out of the laces. That's not super surprising. It's a little disappointing, but what you can always do is get a new ribbon or lacing cord that does match the new color. Right, so I've done one preliminary rinse with the garden hose. My last step is going to be to take this inside and give it a nice hand wash with a little bit of detergent to get the rest of the dye out of it that hasn't stuck. So here's one little spot I'm going to show you guys. So here's an oops. So you can see that some of the dye hadn't quite mixed all the way, and so some of the blue that's in this dye, which is what's making this so pink by the way, there must be a lot of blue in this red. Some of it wasn't fully dissolved in the dye bath, and so it has created a couple of splotches right here on this hip. The rest of it looks pretty good. The lacing really didn't take much of anything, so ideally I would switch it out for a vibrant matching or contrast ribbon. I could also do black or something, that'd be kind of neat. Although, this does kind of match the thread now, so maybe trimming this with a very light pink lace would be cool. I don't know. But anyway, I'm going to do one final rinse and then hang this up to dry, and it's done. All right, I'm doing my final rinse in the sink. You can see that the water is turning slightly pink, which means it definitely does need another rinse. This is never going to be super duper color fast, so I wouldn't recommend wearing this over your favorite like heirloom white chemise or blouse, for instance. But it's going to be pretty close after I get a few more rinses through on this. Now, one last thing I didn't talk about is what if you want to go for a really light tint, like a very faint blush or light color? Well, what you want to do is just put less dye in the dye bath so that there's less dye to soak into the corset. You can always pull it out and add more dye and put it back in if you're just not getting quite the level of saturation you want. Yeah, look at how pink that water is turning. So I'm going to continue washing this with some soap. You all might be worried about the metal boning that's in these. It's fine. It's stainless steel. You wouldn't want to soak it for days, but soaking it and having it wet for an hour or two really isn't a big deal. I've worked with theatrical corsets that are 15, 20 years old and have been hand washed multiple times, you know, for decades, and they have not rusted. So what have we learned through this process? Because this is the first time I've done this. We have learned, make sure you have your dye fully dissolved for sure. It's probably partly just from trying to do this in a wheelbarrow. We want to take the laces out before we get started. If you're dyeing Regency stays, you want to take the wooden busk out. Same goes for any of our other wooden busk styles. Take the wooden busk out first before dyeing. And make sure your corset is nice and fully saturated with water before you put it in the dye bath. And just have fun with it. All right, so here we are several hours after filming the first bits of footage for this video. And as you can see, this is now mostly dry and it is dried lighter. So I would call this a lovely bubblegum pink now. That is one thing about dyeing. Everything dries lighter. So if the wet version is perfect, it actually means that your dye is too light and you need to darken it. However, since I'm going for whatever the heck this comes out as is perfect, it's perfect. I will actually get this one listed on our website. So if you want this bubblegum pink corset in this video, it'll be for sale.